Sorry that the camera is crooked. It's just the only safe way to do it. I don't have any riggings for these cameras. My friends, they do these blog things, these video podcast type blogs as a way to journal. And so as I drive north on I-15 this beautiful Saturday morning to go check on my lovely mama, who's not doing very well with her health, but she's fighting hard and doing good that way. But sometimes they're even brave enough to do the Facebook Lives where if they mess up the conversation, everybody sees it. But I just feel like I want to just say something right now. And first off, I just want to sing a little song. Jesus, the very thought of thee with sweetness fills my breast, but sweeter still thy face to see, and in thy presence rest. That is a beautiful hymn that Jesus and someone else wrote quite a while ago. I didn't look it up. But it was recently redeemed with a slight word change from a street preacher, a Jesus street preacher that I know. I've only met him in person once, but listen to him on his Facebook sometimes. Different way of worshiping, but very, very insightful if you listen. And he, is just sharing how his Jesus, I know that sounds kind of weird, it just basically means, I think, from listening to him, his personal relationship with Jesus, what he thinks the still small voice is saying to him. He recognizes he might be wrong, but that's what he's saying. His Jesus says that as we come into these troublous times that we all know, we can all sense it, we can all feel it and see it, and some of us know certain scriptures about it and different things like that, but as we come into this troublous time, this difficult time, one of the things that Jesus has prepared for us is redeemed songs, redeemed rock songs even, redeemed country songs, redeemed hymns, where the idea is that Jesus and that artist wrote that song together the first time, and if there was anything lovely or of good report or praiseworthy in that song, that was Jesus helped him write that part at least. And then Jesus now, as we come into this 69th week of Christianity from Daniel's 70-week prophecy, that's just my guess, my belief. He's got stuff for us. He's got new ways of thinking for us. He has new ways of being spiritual for us, new ways of approaching him for us. And one of those ways, at least according to Greg's best guess, his belief, is that he will redeem these songs, and that was one of them that really touched my heart. A lot of times when I wake up in the morning, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think of sexual things because I think that's just part of the biology. But I'll also think of other things too, but I don't know quite what to do. Usually just kind of fade off back to sleep until it's time to get up. But what Greg's been doing, what he says his Jesus told him to do, and once again, that's his belief, it's his best guess. He's trying to interpret between the still small voice and his ego, and he tries to be as honest about it as he can. He says that his Jesus tells him to sing songs, sing redeemed songs in the morning as a prayer unto him. I think that's kind of interesting. I was like, that's interesting. So one of the first things he does when he's just laying there kind of waking up is, and I guess his wife knows this too, and she kind of puts up with it. Maybe she has earplugs, and he sings quiet. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know him really that well, but he sings, Jesus, the very thought of thee, with with sweetness fills my breast, but sweeter still thy face to see, and in thy presence rest. And he probably sings more, I don't even know. I actually stopped the little video where he was saying that he did that and just sang that part of that song over and over for a couple minutes because it just felt like the right thing to do, and it just felt like a prayer. It was really awesome. And he's done the same things for songs like AC/DC, you know, kind of like, you, Jesus are my Lord, or Jesus, you saved my soul. Oh, you, Jesus saved my soul, for that AC/DC song, whichever it's called. And like, sweet Jesus Lord, ba ba ba. And then, you know, whatever the next verse is that he feels like him and Jesus wrote that one together, just like him and Sweet Caroline. Neil Diamond wrote Jesus and Neil Diamond wrote Caroline, which is beautiful and has lovely, good report, praiseworthy things about it. That's the part Jesus helped Neil with. And then now you can even do a little bit more Jesus, get a little more Jesus, put a little more Jesus into it, and that's part of the process of redemption. And you know, it's very interesting, you know, kind of the way Greg is. I've watched him, and you know, it's important for me to be genuine, and I feel like that's an important thing. I think he's being genuine. He doesn't want anyone to follow him. He doesn't want to start a church. He doesn't you know, want you to send him any money unless you ask him. Although I've listened to probably 30 of his little things or more, and this last one I listened to, he did say, if Jesus tells you to pitch in or whatever, send it to my Venmo. So, but it doesn't seem like he's trying to do anything but just tell everybody what he's seen, what's his perception, what's his belief. And he says I'm not a big P prophet. I don't want to run no church or anything. Jesus doesn't want me to do that. Like, he's LDS and very proud to be LDS. And so he's like, President Nilsson, Jesus has President Nilsson being the big P prophet. I'm just a small P prophet, or a preacher, or a prophesier, or a street preacher, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. I'm just speaking what I think Jesus is telling me, and just, you know, if it's only for my future self, if that's the only person that watches it, no problem. If it's for somebody who wants to watch it, that's cool. Whatever Jesus wants to do with it, it's fine. But it's really a process of allowing Jesus, a little bit more Jesus into our life. He has this thing at www.getmorejesus.com. And it's not set up in some fancy-dancy way. He says he's an early pre-Zion manger scene, you know, and he's an architect, an engineer, and a designer that's, you know, putting in his little puzzle piece. He doesn't even say everybody should agree with his way. He just says, this is my puzzle piece, which I would probably summarize as, we should be having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ in a very cool way where we literally let him talk to us all day long, like we're his best buddy. And that's what he calls your, you know, Andy Jesus world, or Jesus Greg world, or Jesus, you know, Leslie world, or whatever world, you know, you are. It's your relationship with him and you let that still small voice, you realize there's an ego in there. That's your brain. That's your physical part of who you are. It's your mind. That's your ego. And then there's your spirit, which is what's being communicated there is the still small voice. That's the Holy Ghost. That's the still small voice. That's Jesus. In his mind, when he says Jesus told me, he's saying that the still small voice, which is the voice of Jesus, told him this. and he recognizes he could be wrong, and he realizes that when everybody shares with each other what they think Jesus is telling them, then we can refine it, we can understand it, we can let people see us as we really are, because we're telling them what we think. We're realizing there's an ego there, so we're trying to kind of get that part out of it, which I think generally it's pretty easy. I've been practicing that for quite a while, and it's basically just be humble and kind of think whatever you think that Jesus is telling you, if it's bringing you more into your life, and less concern for getting more money, or less concern for getting more authority or more power or more things. I mean, you might need to do that too, no problem, and he might even be telling you to do that, but when there's less concern for that stuff in whatever you're hearing, and more concern for just being closer to him. Like if the world was going to end tomorrow and you had 8 more hours, it's like, how could you just really commune with him? But just kind of think about how could you kind of be more like that all throughout your day. Sure, you put on the work hat and maybe don't share everything about what like when you watch Greg, if you do, you'll see that he's like, and Jesus told me this, and he purposely, he's a smart man. I can tell. I haven't done any research into him. I've just been watching his stuff. That's it. And I met him once this last winter at Jesus Dance, like a little convention where they do, what's it called? Slam Dance is the one that broke off of it. Oh my gosh, it's up near Sundance. It's like a film festival for Jesus-themed things. Pretty cool. And they have a show and tell where whoever's there, nobody's in charge. They just spend, 1 to 3 minutes, maybe 5 if it's really important, but they kind of keep it short and sweet. They share with the group like a show and tell, something that Jesus taught them, or some art that Jesus helped them draw, or, sing, or whatever. And that was a really fun event. We mostly it was this last year. It was centered on the Chosen, because there's just so much good art, I think, coming out of the Chosen. I think the way they portray Jesus and some of the things they're trying to teach, even if they don't recognize they're trying to teach them, which they probably do recognize it. But and I recognize some things aren't like perfectly scriptural, but I've gone through. They're trying to stay as close as they can. But anyway, last year the Jesus Dance was mostly kind of showing off that type of stuff, and then doing that show and tells like I told you, and then just socializing. But I met Greg there, and I had a good impression about him. You never know at first. You always wonder like what's their thing? What do they want? What are they trying to get? Who do they work for? Who did they read? Who do they follow? But he seems to just follow Jesus. He's not claiming you should follow him. He's not claiming he is a Mormon, but he's kind of pretty cool about you could be anything you want, any religion you want, anything. You can call Jesus an approximation of Jesus if you want. If you want to call Jesus, beautiful spirit of the whole universe, maybe that's what you want to call it, or Muhammad, or Buddha, or if you want to call it, my guardian angel, or whatever. Those are called approximations of whatever. Word is the best word for the truth, but it's just, and I call it Jesus or Heavenly Father, because that's what I've been taught, and Holy Ghost. But whatever the approximation is of what the real thing is, we focus on that more in our lives, and that's kind of what I noticed about him. He's not claiming anything except just trying to get more Jesus, which I like. And I like the idea of waking up to that song, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to. At least that little part of that verse, I'm going to try that. And I feel like he also told me to take some of the songs that he's helped me write. Mine are kind of more like poems, and then I learned to play the guitar and try to put it to music, and some of them are pretty nice. And thank God thank Jesus for that, for helping me, because I realize he did help me on every good thing I've done, every piece of art I've done. He's at least helped me, and there's been a few occasions where he did it pretty much all himself. But I think maybe I might, let him redeem some of those songs. Keep the originals, but also have the redeemed versions too. So kind of excited about that. But the main reason I wanted to do this little video thing is just to say what was in my heart a minute ago. That was all just to lead up to this thing. that last verse, or that kind of redeemed verse says, but sweeter still thy face to see. I've come to believe that when we see his face, when you go through the scriptures that talk about seeing his face, that it is when we agree in common. When we can get the people in our closest circles, maybe, the 200, 300, 400 people in our closest circles. Maybe that's your neighborhood, your community. Maybe that even includes extended family and stuff like that. But if we can get the people in our closest circles to do their own thing, but do things together by full agreement, by common consent, by not majority rules, not dictatorship, not authority, but just like everybody, even the older kids who have taken enough responsibility to have a vote, where everybody can be like, yes, we all like this, we all feel this. To me, that is how we see his face. And that's how we know, with the still small voice in all of us and the ego, what's what? We share genuinely what we believe Jesus is telling us. We never intend harm. If you intend harm, you intend to get back at somebody, you intend to create your own justice. If you intend harm on somebody, whether that's hitting them or some sneaky thing that you're going to do to them to get them back or whatever, we never do that. And we promise to be genuine, and we promise to, I like the words I feel like Jesus gave me was to act in good faith. We're not perfect, but when we make interactions with other people, let's try to be as honest and forthright as possible, even though I have not done that my entire life. I've done that a lot of it, but so I'm a sinner, and I know that, and that's why I'm so grateful for Jesus, because otherwise I would just give up. And the more Jesus I have in my life, ever since I was redeemed, I think I've always been redeemed, but when I was born again is a better way to say it. When I was born again and redeemed on November 1st, 2018 in a hotel in New Jersey, seems like he's been helping me have more and more Jesus in my life. I'm really glad for that, And any approximation, if you would feel uncomfortable with that word Jesus, I don't think God cares that much. He's got all kinds of languages all over this world. He's got languages all over the universe. He's got traditions and stories and words and different things all over the universe, and he doesn't really care. But just so understand that my approximation of that is Jesus. It's Heavenly Father. And so anyway, I just wanted to say that I think that when we can agree in common with our closest people, with our communities, and when other communities can agree in common with other communities when there's bigger things to do together, because we should do things together. One time the Lord told me, building together without flux or fear is fuel to the innermost voice that we hear. And that was one of those times where he just basically said those words, I heard it in my mind's ear, not as an auditory voice, but building together without flux or fear is fuel to the innermost voice that we hear. Our light is refined when the goal is the same. It's building together sans force, that means without force, sans force that remains. It's building together sans force that remains forever. And so when we build together without force, that's how we build the eternal. That's how we build our spirits. That's what he wants us to do. And when we create hierarchies and when we justify everything based on authority and our traditions, and this is how it's been done, and I've felt a really good feeling several times in my life about doing it this way, instead of listening to each other, what Jesus is saying, and trying to figure out where we can agree. Because if we do that humbly, I think God can actually steer us in the right direction to where we need to go, which is Zion, which is the New Jerusalem, which is the law of heaven, which is heaven on earth, which is the kingdom of heaven. And it's Jesus's kingdom. It's not the law and the prophets. That was the Old Testament. That was preparatory. It's Jesus's kingdom that none of the kingdoms of Christianity so far have been able to build. The very, very first kingdom of Christianity was the very first church, the one that Paul was riding around going from church to church, trying to remind them basically what Jesus taught, which is right there in the Beatitudes, and right there in the Sermon on the Mount, and right there in the Doctrine and Covenants, for those of you who believe in that and believe that Joseph Smith is the prophet of the last dispensation, which we're already in. We've been in this last dispensation since him. And there's a lot of confusion in the scriptures, and it's fine. I mean, we don't have to get mad at each other. We could just listen to each other. What do you feel like Jesus is telling you? And for the people who are like, I don't feel Jesus telling me anything, then that's fine. But if you can realize how important that is, then you could say, okay, I'm going to be humble, which I think is the number one thing we could. He told me, humility is the prayer I require of you. That's what he said to me. I'm sure other people have other things they need to work on, but I definitely think humility is what's necessary in Zion, because we are so used to appealing to our authority figures, which I understand it. I was raised Mormon. Like, you do not question the prophet. That says that you are an apostate. And, and the Lord will never let the prophet lead you astray. So they say, but I think that we need to realize, or at least I feel like Jesus is telling me, we need to realize these are the last days, and there's a few things that we misunderstood. Just like the Jews in the time of Christ misunderstood some things too. We watch that and read about that, and we're like, oh, we would never be like those guys. We'd never be like the Sadducees, and we would never be like the Pharisees. We would have loved Jesus. We would accept him. But we are all stuck in our own traditions too. And some people say, well, I've taken covenants. Well, let me just tell you something that Jesus told me, and you can kind of weigh it and maybe be humble and at least think about it. But the covenants that you guys are making in the temple are not the same covenant that is talked about in the scriptures. That covenant is to come to Zion, which means to enter communities. Community just means everyone knows everyone. They decide on what the community boundaries are or whatever, but where everyone in that community does things by common consent. They live their own life. They practice the principle of liberty, which means to add value to community freely. The best definition I've ever heard is from Keith Kelsch, an author. He's also known as a genuine optimist. But he says, liberty is free hands that add value to community. And the opposite of that is controlling hierarchies that still value for themselves. And hierarchies always tend that way. They tend to it. You may have a good hierarchy for a long time. You may then have a bad one, then another good one. There's good can come out of them. Good fruits can come out of hierarchies, but that's the good that can come out of Babylon. If you want to come to Zion, you don't believe in a dictatorship where one person makes all decisions. And no, you don't believe in a democracy where 51% make the decision. And no, you don't even believe in a democratic, a constitutional democratic republic where they separate mankind, women and men in power into three branches of power so that each of them make sure the other ones don't grab too much power. I mean, that's what the Constitution was. Was it inspired? Heck yeah, because it was getting us out of the dictatorial hierarchies that basically have ruled the world most of the world. So what the founders did was inspired by God. But the next step, if we want to come to Zion, is communities who do things in common. They build things together. They beautify their community. They take care of their poor. They raise up their poor. And the whole economy and government of Zion helps that leveling that Jesus wants, where we can be of one heart and one mind. The nerdiest person, the most difficult person in the community is the one that everyone's going to go love the most, because they're going to need to understand what is their issue with this problem over here. And I think in early Zion there will be separations where certain people are like, look, we are a group of people who just feel this way, and you guys feel differently, and so we're going to kind of build our community as best we can, and we'll revisit this in the years to come to see if maybe our way's better or your way's better. But we're not going to war. We just see things a little different. So there's that. And then over time, more and more communities, and some people will hear about communities that they feel good about. Like, yeah, I've heard about this one where the things that they kind of all agree to are these things. And it's like, yes, I like that one. But make no mistake, there's no mayors and governors in Zion. The community, each household I mean, however the community decides to do it, maybe every adult, they get together, they decide what projects that we want to do together. Roads, libraries, whatever. What do we want to do together, and what can we all agree to? And people are like, oh, there's no way. Well, it's because we live in Zion, or in Babylon, and it feels like there's no way. But there's definitely a way. And it will work. That's what Zion is. That's how you bind darkness. I mean, God's not going to come with a magic wand. My cousin, who I love, absolutely love, and I feel like he's a very, very powerful spirit. His name's Clint. He's just like, yeah, the rapture is going to come. So I'm just waiting until the rapture comes. And he's just so caught up in it. No, whatever the Bible says. It has to be what the Bible says. The Bible says, does the Bible say it? But what he doesn't realize, even though he's very smart and very, very powerful spirit, but what he doesn't realize is people can make the Bible say whatever they want. There's a lot of the Bible is not a perfect book. It has been manipulated and translated so long. In fact, the reason why God gave allegorical prophecies that are hard to understand is because he knew that the controlling hierarchies of the world couldn't scratch out and blot out and remove those things. He knew that in the future he could unravel those hierarchies. He tells everybody. Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar, hey, this is the interpretation of this dream, but just so you know, I'm going to say it's all about you, but it's not. It's for the end times. It's for the very end times. John said the same thing. Why did it be in all? Why was it this way? This way, all these hierarchies could interpret it however they wanted, but it wouldn't all make sense until the end times. That's why, it's like I feel bad for some people who are watching this, like, nope, the Bible doesn't say it. The Bible doesn't say it. Well, all I would say is, at least if your Jesus, if your light and truth is telling you, listen to what Andy's saying, or listen to what Greg's saying, or be a little bit more humble about, but to come full circle, the first kingdom of Christianity was the kingdom of the head of gold in Daniel's great image, Nebuchadnezzar's image that became an allegorical prophecy for our time, that he said would be made known in the end times. But that church even messed up. I mean, Rome probably messed it up on purpose. But when Jesus is going around telling everybody that your church is your community, there's not 3 or 4 churches in a community. Your church is your community. And if there's a pastor or a preacher, if that preacher or pastor has any authority at all, you're going down the wrong path. The only authority should be Jesus, and the community should agree together on what kind of church they build. They should agree together on how we'll worship together, and we should let other people worship separately however they want. We believe in the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege, let them worship how, where, or what they may. And Joseph Smith, the prophet of the last dispensation, taught that in relation to the law of consecration, which is, some people are scared of it because I think it's almost purposely taught in a scary way, but all it is these communities of common consent. And there's a couple other rules where, you don't tax or tithe on income, you tax or tithe on interest, what is left over at the end of the year. This way, the people who are really rich are giving away 10% every year because they have extra. This is after they can live in a big house if they want. That's their expenses. That's what they keep to keep the expenses up and stuff like that. And if they want to live lavishly, people work hard, they should be able to do that. But what they have left over at the end of the year, hey, I'm going to buy land, I'm going to buy, whatever, money, whatever the currency is, then they're going to give 10% of every year what they have left over to the community. That's how Jesus levels the community without force. And it's an agreement. Those people say, heck yeah, I have everything I need. I got the biggest house in town, and every year that I have extra, I only have to give 10% to everybody. Shoot, I'll bet you there'll be some people who'll be like, I'm going to give half, or maybe I'll give all of it, because I'm living this wonderful life where we're building a beautiful community and a beautiful neighborhood. We're not fighting each other who's going to be the mayor. We're agreeing in common. And like the misunderstood allegory of what was I going to say about that? The misunderstood allegory of the law of the Tower of Babel. Babel is not Babylon. That's just because it sounds the same, and people have said that before. Babel was Noah's grandson through Ham. Ham and Noah, the Noah's Ark started in Missouri. Most Mormons will agree with that one, because we know through the restoration, not everybody understands this, but the prophet of the last dispensation, Joseph Smith, taught us this, that Noah started in the upper Mississippi River Valley. That's where Adam on Diamond was, where Adam dwelt. With the Great Flood filled the Mississippi River Valley to where you couldn't see land in any direction. And yes, it's an allegory. There were mountains that came up out. He went down the Mississippi River Valley, through the Caribbean, up through the Atlantic, got those currents, and took them all the way to the Straits of Gibraltar. That's where he named that mountain Mount Ararat. Not the mountain in Turkey. That's just, they named it after the story. The one that Noah said was Mount Ararat was that one, that basically right where Gibraltar is, between the two continents of Africa and Europe on the northernmost part of Africa, westernmost part of Europe. And then even the scriptures say that he was on the sea for much longer after that. He went through, my belief is he went all the way through the Mediterranean Sea, and he landed on the Gaza Strip, probably just west of where Jerusalem sits now. And he sent Japheth north to the Isles of the Gentiles, which is the Greek islands. He sent Shem to the East Mountain, which is Sumer, or the Tigris and the Euphrates. And he sent Ham, and he went with Ham west to the land of Shinar. And the land of Shinar is not also in Babylon, or is not also in Sumer, which is where Babylon is. We think those things because the scriptures were written by all Shemites, or people from the tribe of Shem. They are the ones that went into the Tigris and the Euphrates, to that area where it's formerly known as Sumer. And when he went to the land of Shinar, which is the Nile River Delta, the Lord commanded him, just like he commanded him to build a ship, he commanded him to build a great tower, just like he commanded Daniel to write an allegorical prophecy that the bad guys couldn't understand, just like he taught John the Revelator to teach some principles in allegory that the bad guys couldn't understand, that he could unravel, Jesus could unravel at the end of times. He had Noah build a tower right at the top of the Nile River Delta, which is the land of Shinar, biblically. And, Noah was a great astronomer. God taught him everything about the stars. Noah's the one that taught the people there, that were there already in the land of Shinar, which I'm not positive, but I think were the Chaldeans. And those people ended up continuing on, and they became the priests of Egypt that even Jesus went to go see and to learn from, because they had some of the blessings that were given to the world through Ham and through his grandson Babel, which I'm guessing maybe Babel was the guy that was kind of in charge. And remember, that was the law and the prophets. They didn't live the higher law at that time. Enoch did, and Moses tried to get Israel to, but Jesus came. He's the whole reason it can even happen. But he came. He tried to reintroduce it. The head of gold in Daniel's great image dream. The next one was the Great Tower is the Tower of Babel, and that is the Great Pyramid of Giza, which was only opened. They didn't even know there was a way in. All the other pyramids had openings, and when they went in there was all kinds of furnishings, and there was really interesting writing on the wall, which were these prayers in these ancient Egyptian languages. But the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Great Pyramid, the one that was there first, there was no opening. It was only in the beginning of the 19th century that they finally found an opening to it. And what did they find when they got in there? Nothing. No treasures, nothing. Just a couple passageways intersecting with each other, where near the intersection there's a passageway going straight. It's not a 4-sided pyramid, it's an 8-sided pyramid, barely. And there's measurements, not just measurements in feet or meters or inches, but measurements in the measurement of the time, which we have. It's called a pyramid inch. It's slightly slightly bigger than the British inch. And if you go by that, which is what the builders obviously used, so it's not like we're you just using numbers to make things work. It's all based on the pyramid inch, which was what the builders used, which is obvious, and there's books that talk about that if anyone's interested. The big compendium that was done in the because remember, it was just the early 19th century, the early 20th century. Davidson and Aldersmith wrote a couple volume set of all the measurements and made their best guesses of what those measurements could mean, and they actually talked about what they could mean biblically, but they didn't know about the restoration, so they had no idea why the Great Stone of Stumbling came in 1844. They couldn't figure out what happened in 1844 that would mean that. But the whole pyramid is a timeline, and it helps us understand and unveil some of the allegorical timelines of Daniel and of John. And the chest of silver was the Roman Church, the second kingdom of Christianity, the Roman Church. And why did they also fail? I mean, did they do great things? Sure, there was good Roman Catholics. There are still. Are there bad? Yeah, there's bad in that history. Yes, anytime there's a hierarchy, you're going to have stupid things happen, because hierarchies are Babylonian. They turn the follower into an idolater. And idolatry just means that you just listen to the authority. You don't really think it through yourself. You just, whatever the authority says. You can think it through, but you're only thinking it through to support what they're saying. You don't want to think things through on yourself. You're stuck in idolatry. It's hard. It's a bad thing. It's something that the scriptures talk about. You're not a bad person. It's just, in hierarchies, you always want to be a little bit nicer to the guy that might put you ahead a little bit, and it just creates a disingenuous people. And those who aren't disingenuous, then they rose above, and good for them, and good things can happen in Babylon. But in Zion, we don't have hierarchies. It's not worth it. We can all make more money and have more comfort and more joy. We can live in heaven. Our community can be like heaven, with campfires and beautiful streets and beautiful lights and beautiful lawns and gorgeous buildings that we build together without flux or fear. And the next kingdom was the kingdom of brass, in Daniel's dream, the belly and the thighs of brass, which is the Protestant kingdom of Christianity. And have they done great things? Sure. Did they at least decentralize the church a little bit? Yeah, good for them. That was the biggest hierarchy of all those Romans. But they still built hierarchies. I'm in charge. We don't like you now. I'm in charge. And it still created idolatry in the follower and what I call status sickness, because you can't really have status without getting sick. You'll start to, your fears will give you, your mind, your ego, the reason to stop listening to Jesus and to just start protecting yourself and protecting your status. It's just, very few can get past that. And so in Zion, it's okay, because the only one that is our king is Jesus. He's the King of Kings, because every mom and every dad is a king. The word republic doesn't come from res publica, the people's thing. It comes from rex publica, the people are kings and queens, which just means life givers. It comes from the word gen. King comes from the Germanic word kin, which comes from, there's a whole etymology for it, but it means, it's like gen as in genealogy or generation or gender. It's life. A king and a queen give life. They are the fathers and the mothers of the family. And the only thing that, when we read, especially like European history, and where they have all these kings and queens, what they did is they took the family, which was supposed to be a loving mom and dad who helped their kids become kings and queens themselves, and they basically said, only our family gets to do that. Or only our 5 families get to do that. And then that's just a big hierarchy. That's what happened to Rome. The Protestant churches that kind of started in like the early 16th century, 1450 with Wycliffe or Wycliffe, and 1517 with Luther, And and it went on, and even the kingdom of silver, which is or the chest of silver, which is the kingdom of the Roman kingdom, the Roman Catholic Church, even they tried to do a little bit better because of the kingdom of brass. The Protestants had a Reformation, and so the Catholics had a Reformation too. Made some good changes. The Mormons came along, and they were lucky. They came in the 62nd week of Daniel's prophecy in Daniel chapter 9. Each week is a lunar cycle in years, and it starts with, and this is just my belief, I'll find out if I'm right or not when Jesus kind of tells all of us, but those lunar cycles in years start with Jesus's ministry at around, I'm guessing, somewhere around what we call AD 29, which means the 62nd week starts around 1818 and ends around 1848. And in that week, according to Daniel, the covenant, the one that the Mormons believe that they are living, would be restored and trampled in the very same week. And so it just stinks that the Mormons got everything that they needed. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints got everything that they needed with the prophet of the last dispensation, but because it was just too hard to do what Joseph Smith was trying to teach them to do, which was to live in these communities of common consent, they just worked their way out of it. Tithing of interest? Now let's change it to tithing of income. 6 weeks after Joseph Smith died, or was martyred, or murdered, or whatever, let's change it from interest to income, because it's no big difference. It's kind of the same thing. No, interest taxes what you have left over at the end of the year. You tithe on that. Income grinds the faces of the poor. And so this went a little longer than I thought. For those of you who listened all the way, good for you. And it doesn't matter. I know I'll listen to the whole thing in the future. But what a lot of people don't realize, and it's hard to believe it, is that for someone like me, it's hard to believe it anyway, is that the legs and feet of iron and miry clay, as described by Jesus through Daniel in Daniel chapter 2, the legs and the feet of iron and miry clay are the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it doesn't mean that they aren't Joseph is the prophet of the last dispensation. They do have the Book of Mormon, which is true. And they have a lot of the scriptures. None of us have all the scriptures, but the ones that the bad guys snuffed out, so none of us could see them, or anything that had to do with communities of common consent, because that's how you bind darkness, not magical powers. And when we wake up, however we wake up, with a prayer in our heart, or thinking about sex, or thinking about money problems, or singing a redeemed song that Jesus and Neil Diamond and Greg Mueller redeemed together. Jesus redeemed it, but they let the other people help. I mean, whatever it is, if we can get more Jesus, we can learn to hear his voice. How? By agreeing, by sharing with each other what we believe Jesus is telling us, knowing that he doesn't like control. Don't you guys remember the story of the war in heaven? Mormons should all know that one. And anyone who even likes John Milton, he talked about it in his Paradise Lost, and many other traditions of a war in heaven where it's like basically freedom versus force. Well, we want a good king. Well, it's still force. Well, we want a good hierarchy. It's still force. Well, what's the alternative? You have to have order. You could do Jesus's way. Jesus's way is communities where everyone knows everyone, and they live the principle of liberty, not tyranny, and they do things together. They build things together without flux or fear, and that's building it by common consent, by common agreement, where everybody, all voting people of the community, which should be everybody, even older children, I think, that are responsible, all nod their heads and say, yes, we like it. Let's do it. And if somebody says, hey, I got an issue here, what's going to happen is you're going to have more and more genuine people. And the difficult people are either going to separate out into other communities where maybe they're not even difficult people. Maybe they're just different. Or maybe they're difficult, and they'll learn later on when they see that their community that they joined isn't doing so good, but the communities that are doing it right are doing better. And then they'll ask if they could come back into that community. More than likely that community will vote all together, and they'll say, yes, come in. We want you. We need you. We want people who can add value to our community and make our lives better, as a community. We don't have a mayor because we meet and we take care of things. We don't have this big old legal system with lawyers and all this stuff. We have juries that will come together on a moment's notice. Everybody's agreed to 4 jury sessions a year, and when the text comes, just like Uber, you say yes, I'll take it, and you go for whatever. I think different communities will figure out their own ways, and what will be the driving force? It'll be, how can we have the most beautiful, wonderful, peaceful, prosperous, how can we have the most wonderful community without force and fear, where everyone agrees in the things that we build together? How can we do that? How can we have libraries and keep, kind of help people who are feeling a little bit rebellious in the way that they're trying to live their life? How can we kind of pull that in and work that out? Let's figure that out. What would be the best way to do it? And they'll figure out those ways with Jesus' help. And Jesus has told me several ways, and I think if he wants me to share them, more than I have even, then I will. And I hope other people will share. I know Keith Kelsch, for those of you who haven't tapped into him yet, he's also known as the genuine optimist. But Keith Kelsch has some great ideas. I know that there's some organization, I've heard that it's a few older guys that are strong LDS people, and maybe one of them's no longer in the church but used to be LDS. I don't know, but the Mormon MormonWatchman.com also is a really great resource. That's wow, just listen to what they're saying. Some people are oh, if I even think outside of what President Nelson is saying, then I'm being unrighteous. I'm being an apostate. Well, that's anybody who's making you feel that way. That is a very intimidating thing. Wait a minute, you're telling me I can't even go and yeah, but don't do it because they'll corrupt your mind. Well, wait a second. Anyway, you can kind of read between the lines on that one. People should be discussing and trying to understand, because the Mormons messed up too. And I don't hate the Mormons. I don't think people should quit the Mormon church. I think people should stay in the Mormon church. I'm hoping someday, the Mormon church kicked me out. My friend David Stone's they didn't really kick you out, Andy. They just wanted you to feel the pain for doing something wrong, which I did. I hired a prostitute and got arrested for it. And my wife left me and I got fired, and my church kicked me out, and it was just a really hard time. And it didn't really do much good. I don't think it was the right way to be done, personally. But either way, I hope for someday maybe to be back with those guys, because culturally that's where I've been. But if I did, I would probably every chance I got, in a very that the Lord told me to, and in a very respectful way, I'd be the only issue we have here is we're not living the law of consecration. We're not living Zion. We still have bishops that were chosen from a central authority instead of bishops that were chosen from the people. No, in our church, they all raised their hand and agreed to it. Yeah, but you didn't have any voice in that. And if you disagreed, you'd be intimidated. So there's a lot we have to learn, and there's a lot of traditions that we will have to kind of look at and kind of hopefully be humble, hopefully listen to each other, and try to learn maybe where things went wrong and where we could improve it and what we could do. I say stay in your church and stay in the kingdom of iron if you want, but also realize that the stone that's cut without hand, which means without authority, it means without God coming down and saying, here's how we're going to do it, guys, get in line. That's what my belief is when it says the stone cut from the mountain without hand, means that authority is not going to be the driving principle here. It's going to be the church, the true church, and the true covenant, which you can live in your church that you're in right now, but you might have to rethink some of your false traditions and false doctrines. But where the church is the community, where you live, the people that you associate with, the people that your community. I think for some reason it's, like a couple hundred families, but I don't know, something like that. Your community agrees. Everybody agrees. And that's the church. And the covenant is what I've just been explaining, is being able to live in a society like that. You promise to be genuine. You promise to act in good faith. You promise to intend no harm. If you're smart, you'll stay close to Jesus, and you'll realize, or your approximation of Jesus, and you'll realize that is your king. That is your primary life giver. And King of Kings is the king of these moms and dads who are part of this community council, who decide in common. It's a powerful thing, and like the people that lived in the Tower of Babel before they started not living the way they were supposed to, while they built that thing, they built it all in common. It says that they were of one language and of one voice, and it implies that they were of one heart, and there was nothing that could be done that they couldn't do because they were so unified. And then there's stuff missing in those scriptures that makes people think, but God was mad with them because they weren't trying to get to heaven. They were trying to leave a message that we can build heaven on earth. It's the same message that Daniel tells. It's the same message that John the Revelator tells. It's the same message that all of the prophets, when they spoke allegorically, talked about, which was even the Mormons would mess up, even the Catholics, even the Protestants, even the original church, even the Mormons. The ones that got the covenant in the 62nd week also trampled the covenant in the 62nd week. And maybe you didn't do it, maybe your grandparents didn't do it, but somehow by the misunderstanding or whatever of leadership or whatever, they decided, hey, we're going to put the law of consecration off right now. Let's do a Babylonian hierarchy. Let's do that for a while until God tells us different. He's going to redeem Zion in his own due time when you make that decision. And that's what the last thing he ever told the prophet Brigham Young. I think it's a DC 136. Hey, I need to cast you out into the wilderness of Utah. He didn't tell him this, but it's for 1,260 days, which means things. And God's not revealed to me. They're right there. He's helping more than just me understand this. Other people understand it too. And that is that it's the Mormon church. You're going to be cast into the wilderness for an amount of time. Of Utah, and I'll still make it blossom for you. I'll still make it bloom. I'll still accept your false tithing so that we can at least do some good in this world. But I'll redeem Zion in mine own due time, during troublous times, in the 69th week of Christianity, which is now, which is 2024. So, like my friend says, I echo the call. We go to war in 2024 with Jesus as our King and charity as our biggest bomb. Our best weapon is charity, because we're not going to solve this by arms. Even if we justify it by saying, we have the right, I have the right to defend myself, just like my great-grandpa did and all those things, and I'm going to bear my arms, I'm going to take up arms. It's just still Babylonian. What we need to do is come to Zion. What Greg Muller, the way he says that, is build your own Jesus David world, Jesus Tracy world, Jesus Kylie world. Build that world that's where Jesus and you are at the center of it. And Jesus teaches you how to interact with the people around you. He teaches you, and you allow them to teach you too, because you let them tell you what they think Jesus is saying. I've kind of harped on that a little bit, but I'm hoping people will kind of see that. It's a different way of thinking. When you've been in Babylon for a long time, it's hard. And when you hear someone like Greg Muller, you want to just scroll past really quick because he makes you uncomfortable. But if you could be humble and listen, maybe the still small voice would tell you something. I'm not saying that you have to worship like he does. He worships very, very playfully, and it's like a little child. And I think there's some real good reasons to do that. And I think I could probably stand to add a little bit more of that childlike nature, not childishness, but the childlike nature, the awe and the wonder. It's not so uptight, and I make sure the definition is exactly right, and he did not put the comma in the correct place, and he can't even put together the right words, and all these intimidation tactics that Babylon piles on to make sure that you don't prophesy, that you don't preach, that you don't see the light of God in you right now, being drowned out most of the time by your ego, but you can learn to let that voice become clear. And we need each other to make that happen. And in summary, I just wanted to say that the stone that's cut without hands, is this relationship. It's the true Zion. It's a true republic, a true Rex Publica, where the King of Kings speaks to each of the kings and queens, and they all find out his actual voice, and they see his face when they agree. And that last line, that last part of the line that says, and in his presence rest. His presence is not in Babylon. It is not in the dog-eat-dog world. It's not in the try to get ahead of your neighbor. It's not in the earn as much money as you can. It's not in the get some land out in the mountains somewhere and become a prepper. It's not in watch more news and know a little bit more than your neighbor knows. It's not in any of that. It's in coming together as communities that agree in common. And Satan will not be able to stand there. He will not be able to have a foothold. He won't have any dictators to, cause them to go crazy and to cause mass idolatry. He won't have any majority rules democracies that cause division. He won't have any constitutional democratic republics that are better than the previous two, but still bad, and still a hierarchy, and still Babylonian. He'll have a republic of communities that are led by King Jesus, and who build together and agree together, and darkness is bound, and we see his face, and we rest there in heaven, here on earth as it is in heaven. And I leave that with all you guys who listened, if no one else, to my future self. And I just want my family and loved ones, the ones that I know virtually, the ones that I wish I knew more and saw more, and the ones that are around me now, that I am so sorry for the things I've done wrong, and I'm so glad that Jesus has redeemed me, and that I've been born again, and that I've learned and I've grown, and that he's going to be there for when I fall again. But when I get back up, it's always going to be to building Zion. You can stay in your church, you can stay where you're at, but you got to rethink your false traditions. We all have some of them. We got to rethink our false doctrines. Who cares if we think those through? If nothing else, we'll realize that they're exactly right, and we'll understand them and love them more. Those people who are like saying, no, don't talk about them, you're just getting confused. It's just a bad habit of Babylon. Zion, things change. Things are different.